and welcome to Family Matters. Sex sells. Movies, television programs, clothes, cars, cosmetics, and pharmaceutical products. Sex is a topic that easily draws attention and emotions. But is it possible to be more neutral about the topic of sex? It is true that sex is central in the life of a couple, and often the source of much difficulty in a relationship. Any psychotherapist will attest to the relevance of sex in a relationship and how often it is a topic of conversation in therapy. On this edition of Family Matters, we take a step back from the commercial and emotional aspects of sex to discuss what it does to the brain. We will explore how it activates the reward system. We'll probe the questions surrounding mothering and sexual behavior and how the biology of sex is manifested in a couple's relationship. Joining me is Margaret Donley, who has been studying, teaching, publishing, and speaking about Bowen theory, and has an interest in monogamy, sex, and parenting. She's a licensed social worker in private practice in Kansas City, and she is co-director of the Bowen Family Systems Clinical Seminars, also in Kansas City. She was on the faculty in the Marriage and Family Therapy Training Program in the Menninger Foundation for 12 years, and she has been involved with the Bowen Center in Washington, D.C. since 1985. Peg, welcome to Family Matters.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, how it is that sex is so important in a marriage?
Well, I would have to say that any therapist who sees couples a lot for marital problems, sex always comes up in one way or another. So I've been kind of intrigued at sort of looking at why is sex so important? I mean, I have a female brain. I don't think that males question why sex is so important as much as women do. But I've been noticing, at least over the last 10 to 15 years, how much sex regulates relationships, particularly marital relationships. And how, and so I got curious about how does it do that? How does it happen in other species that happens? What is it about sex that's so important? Because it is everywhere. And people who have marital problems, more often than not, are not having any sex. Mm-hmm. So it's a big issue that I see all the time.
So you're saying that sex regulates the relationship. What do you mean by that?
Well, this requires a little bit of background in neurobiology. So sex, one of the reasons why humans form pair bonds is because of a number of neuropeptides, vasopressin, oxytocin, and the way those neuropeptides operate in the reward system of the brain. So we perform sex, we get involved with people, we fall in love because the reward system is activated. And it's activated through a whole complex and cascading of neuropeptides and the activation of the reward system. So this sexual behavior in humans is what is required to form a pair bond. And that pair bond becomes very much more attached if sex is going on continuously. Because particularly in humans, this is true in other non-human primate monogamous species, that females do not necessarily show when they're ovulating. So one of the theories about that is that they don't show it because it's important for males and females to have sex continuously in order to solidify the pair bond continuously.
So what happens in the female's brain and in the male's brain differently in this reward system?
It's not different in the reward system, but what is different is that vasopressin, which is very, very similar to oxytocin, but males have more vasopressin in their brains, which tend to be associated with vigilance, dominance, mate guarding, because if you're not attached to a female, you don't guard her, right? Mm-hmm. So males have all these things going on through vasopressin. In particular, they also have oxytocin, but the vasopressin is more dominant in a male brain, and it goes into vigilance and mate guarding and aggression. Females have much less vasopressin in their brains, receptors in their brains, and they have much more oxytocin, which makes them more maternal, makes them more loving, and that kind of thing. What's interesting about sex is that for males, when males become sexually aroused, they have an increase in vasopressin, intense, vigilant, mate guarding, and then at the moment of orgasm, the whole thing flips and their brain is flooded with oxytocin. Oxytocin. They become loving and nurturing and endearing to their wives. So oxytocin becomes very important to the male brain to solidify the attachment with the female.
But it is, it starts in the male brain. It starts with the vasopressin,
right,
which is related to sex, or it gets activated.
Right, right. You know that adage that says males are interested in talking after they have sex, women are interested in talking before they have sex? That's because when women have a lot of vasopressin going on, they have no sexual interest. Women are only sexually interested if there's a lot of oxytocin. So there's grooming, there's talking, there's all this nurturing behavior. Then women are receptive. The other thing that's interesting is that I tell this to men all the time. When women are stressed, they are not interested in sex. This is not necessarily true with males. When males are stressed, they can become more interested in sex.
Does that happen in other species other than humans?
Yes. If you look at prairie voles are monogamous mammals. They look a little bit like rats, but they form very intense pair bonds. With males, let me think for a second here. When males are very stressed, they form a more intense pair bond with the female. Now this is very interesting. When female prairie voles are stressed, they do not form more of a pair bond with the male. They form more of a bond with their natal nest. Children and paternal parents. Children and extended family. Prairie voles have extended families.
Mm-hmm. So if the little male rat is stressed, it goes towards the female. If the female rat is stressed, it goes towards family and children. An offspring.
Right. That's right. Now, whether that is particularly true in humans, I don't know that there's actually research that says that per se in the way that they research this in prairie voles. I don't want to say that. But what I do know is that the research does say that 80% of males will report that they use sex as a way of decreasing stress. Only 20% of women say that. That's a very huge difference in male and female brains regarding sex. The other thing that's interesting is men think about sex more often, men fantasize about sex more often, men make more sacrifices to have sex much more than women do. And following a breakup, men are much more likely to masturbate than women do. Their brains are different in this regard. And this is really true when women have children. I think it's a little bit less true before women have children.
How does that get intensified? What do you think? When children come into
I
the picture?
think that maternal behavior cancels sexual behavior. I'm going to say that again. Maternal behavior cancels sexual behavior. This is very true of the couples that I see. If there is a child that is needy of the mother, women are not interested in sex. Men can still be interested in sex. So if there is maternal behavior that is required of a woman, she is not going to be interested in sexual behavior. If she is stressed, she is not interested in sexual behavior. This is different for men. So men get upset because their wives are over-involved with their children and they're not interested in sex. It's such a common complaint. I hear this all the time.
And women complain that all they want is
all
sex.
they want is sex. And I can't tell you how many women I see that are angry about the fact that all their husbands want is sex. So when I explain to them how this works in the brain, it's so calming to women because it makes them less angry. It's like, oh, so this is a way that men manage stress? They want to have sex? Just like the way she wants to manage stress is to hold her little 3-year-old for an hour. You know, if your little 3-year-old were rejecting you and rejecting you and rejecting you, you can understand how hard it would be. Because females move towards their kids to get oxytocin. Males move towards females to get oxytocin.
Oxytocin being?
That feel-good, nurturing, solidifying the bond. neuropeptide.
Don't they call it the love?
The love drug, yes.
Love drug.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
So we want that in our brains.
We want
But
that in our brains.
men get it in a different way than women.
Right, and men have less receptors in the brain for it. They have more receptors for the cousin, or I should say the sibling, of oxytocin, which is vasopressin, which again goes into mate guarding, vigilance, and defending their nest. Men defend, women nurture. The other thing that's interesting about the literature in this is that Shelley Taylor did this literature, and she's probably one of the best known women who have researched this in terms of what happens when women are stressed. They tend and befriend. She's coined this term, tend and befriend. Women move towards their children and other relationships. Males don't. Males put all their emotional capital into their wife. Lots of research on this. This is not just what I think.
It's a little scary.
A little scary. That's right. But men can have friends and stuff, but very few men. Most men, their primary confidant is their wife. That is not true with women.
Well, who do they talk to and feel confident with?
Their wife. Women.
No, women.
Women,
If it's not with their husband?
friends, and their children, if their children are adults. Their families, sisters. It's not necessarily their husband. Or it's in addition to their husband. They have lots of confidants. Men have usually one confidant, and all that capital is in their wife. So you can imagine when she starts moving away, how distressing this is. His life is her, and she's now involved with all these other things. The kids, for example. I mean, again, that's a simple example, but I see it so often that it merits, talking about.
Well, what would you say with the reverse that is also observed in clinical cases where the husband looks outside of the home and then the wife tries to bring him back and goes after him? Jealousy.
Same thing goes true. Same thing has been talked about in Charles Snowden's research in tamarins, non-human primates, tamarin. So what he found is that when the pair bond is threatened, i.e. you find out your husband may be separate out of the marriage, she becomes very interested in sex. She hasn't had an interest for years. All of a sudden, they start having sex again because the pair bond is threatened, and now there's a focus on having sex again. This happens all the time. Unfortunately, what also happens all the time is by the time she finds out about it,
It's too late.
it's too late. That's not always true.
So sex, in fact, has a function in solidifying the bond. It's
Yes.
not just, at a biological level, it's not just about I love you and this represents our union or something
Right.
like that.
And the reward system is a very important part of that. And I think, that saying that we hear, which is, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. If I had $1 for every time I heard that.
Say that again.
I love you. A husband or a wife says, I love my spouse, but I'm not in love with my spouse. I think that totally has to do with, I love them in the sense of, I don't want them to leave me, but I'm not getting the reward through the brain as much as I used to. And those, again, a lot of variation. Some men and women are really addicted to that reward, because when you have an affair, it is activated in a whole new level. That reward and seeking it's like cocaine. And that's what gets people together in the first place. That's why people marry and have children, if they really knew what they were doing. But biology is just moving them around. The cortex evolved much later in the course of evolution than did these deeply embedded emotional processes that are driving us really on levels that we don't even know. Now again, not all the same. Women and men, there are some men that do very well when their wife has a baby. They're not jealous. They don't get mad that she's not interested in sex for the first 6 weeks. They do very well with that. There are other men that have a terrible time with that are needy, 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 needy. They're upset because their wife is no longer interested in them. That's another tape, right? Other factors, right? Yeah.
So in fact, the relationship has a calming effect on both, or more on the male. Because I understand that when you were giving me this example earlier, that when the husband comes to the house and sees the wife upset. So tell me about that. I don't want to.
This is a little bit not related to sex, but also germane to what we're talking about. So I think this illustrates the differences in the brains between moms and dads. If a woman is taking care of her children all day long, the husband comes home and he looks at his wife and his wife is upset and overwhelmed about her day. He immediately goes negative towards the children. Think of the triangle. He immediately, the wife is upset, his primary attachment, she's upset, he's mad at the kids who upset her.
You didn't do your homework. What did you do to your mom?
You've been not treating your mother well. This is not the way it works when the husband's with the kids all day long and the wife comes home and he's upset with the children. She doesn't do that. You know what she does? She says, what did you do that the kids are upset? It's your fault. The kids are upset and you didn't do a good job. You didn't do it right. Very, very different.
So she's more oriented towards the kids and he's more oriented towards mom.
His emotional capital is in her. She's upset. So therefore, as I said in another tape, a lot of paternal behaviors actually just a spin-off of the relationship with the primary female. Because paternal behavior in many ways is related to this pair bond relationship. And I think that, again, extramarital affairs and infidelity is a very complex topic, and I don't mean to make it simple because it's really not. But I think that when men are in a marriage for a long time where the wife is over-involved with the children and he's excluded. Now, he plays his part in that. He's not a victim of being excluded. But the way it works over time is he gets excluded. He can manage that through various ways. He can manage it through an addiction with alcohol, gambling, overworking, or he can manage it by finding someone who's going to make him feel good because his wife doesn't make him feel good anymore. And almost all the affairs that I see, I would say that is overriding. So there's been a lot of disruption in the pair bond for years and years, and then there's a perfect storm. He has resources, number one thing. He has opportunity, and he meets the right woman.
There's something that is missing, I think, and
okay.
That it sounds, or the way we've talked about this so far, it sounds like it's the male who needs more the female. And as if it's not reciprocal, and I'm sure it's not. So tell me the other side of the story.
Again, I'm going to talk about couples that have children in an intact family. Blended families are a little bit different version of this. More often than not, I would say that mothers are aligned primarily with their children, and their focus is with their children, and their investment is with their children. Fathers have investment with their children too. I make this black and white, and it's not, obviously. But that the mothers will put more of their attention and energy on their children. And all things being equal, unless the couple is very mature, and they're talking, and they're spending time together to make sure that this is all equalized, more often than not, it can get jammed up pretty quickly.
And sex is one of the avenues to maintain that bond.
Sex is a really important way of a marriage being regulated. When people have sex, they are nicer to each other, they give more grace to each other, they are less irritated at each other. Again, vasopressin in the male is lower, so he's not as angry. He's nicer, you know. That's one clear spin-off from having sex. Now again, how long does that last? And, you know, am I advocating that women prostitute themselves here? Absolutely not. I don't think that it's just having sex, jump in bed, 10 minutes later you're done. I'm talking about having a marriage and a relationship where sex is openly talked about, which actually brings me to another issue, which is that before people get married, inevitably they can talk about sex very openly and freely. Sex is a big topic of discussion. The longer a couple is married, the harder it is to talk about sex. This is 100% universally true.
What do you make out of that? How do you understand it based on what you know about the theory?
I don't exactly know, except that it becomes such a, it's an area where people can get mad and frustrated, and I'm not going to give him what he wants because he's been mean to me, she says. He says, I'm going to act disinterested in her because all she cares about is the kids. And it gets more and more jammed up, and then when they try to talk about it, it's all about criticism. You don't do this, you've gained weight, you whatever. 100 different things. So it, becomes a real problem, and that, I think that the couples that can talk about sex and make sex an important part of what goes on, I don't care about frequency. I care that they both feel like sex is a part of the marriage, and it's something that they can do together that helps solidify the pair bond, and that women realize in particular how important sex is for males. Now again, I don't mean to say that sex is not important for women. Sex is great for women. Sex should be fun for women. But women get really, really shut down and upset about this. Like they're being used. Like, the statements like, all my husband wants is sex. Well, no, all your husband really wants is he wants a little bit of stress relief, because oxytocin is a very significant anti-stress hormone. And so after sex, he's calmer, and what he really wants is he wants to feel less stress in his marriage, because his wife is his life. Happy wife, happy life.
Right, we hear that. It's so interesting to see how these deep processes guide our behavior in ways we don't think. Or we think we're more on top of things, or we are more in charge of our own behavior than actually we are, I guess.
Yeah, again, I don't think the cortex, I certainly am convinced of this. I've been doing clinical work for over 30 years. I don't, people are not very successful at using their cortex to get them out of the problems they're in. A woman's in an affair and she knows that she shouldn't be, and she can't stop herself, and she knows it's a terrible thing to do, but it just is driven. Now, again, a lot of variation in how that works,
but it has a component in the biology. It's not. It happens at so many levels at the same time, and one of it is the biology of it all.
One of it is the neurobiology of it, but the other one that's equally important is the family that you come out of. So people have come out of their families with enormous complexity in terms of expectations, in terms of what they expect of the other to do for them, of the way immaturity, emotional immaturity shows itself, enormous expectations. And that, I would have to say, is primarily driven by the family in which you grew up in.
Would you say then that the way you manage sex in your couple's relationships has also to do with the family you come from?
Absolutely.
What's the connection there?
I think that if, for example, a man or a woman comes out of a family where there's been a history of extramarital affairs with their parents, they have a greater likelihood of having it in their own family. They just do. Doesn't mean they're going to. But in other words, the way chronic anxiety was managed with the parents was through infidelity. That has an impact on the next generation, and you have a greater likelihood of it happening there as well. Again, it's not quite that simple. It's not a predictor necessarily, but you come out of your family because in the parental family, that's how anxiety was managed. You're not meeting my needs, I'm having an affair, then maybe they stay together, maybe they don't. But that impacts the next generation tremendously in terms of how well they manage the marriage and what their expectations are of the marriage.
What would you say about couples that don't have, they have canceled sex in their way of operating, and but they have a bond. So how does that happen?
I think that almost all marriages started with having sex, number one. I think that's what gets people to reproduce, and I think sex is really the primary thing that gets people to reproduce, and to have pair bonds. Pair bonds reproduce. I don't know that, I think that people vary in the degree to which they require sex to calm them down. And I do think that people vary in that. And I think that there are some couples who from the very beginning have had not a lot of sex. And, they're okay with that. I don't typically see those people. I've seen a few. But I don't think that it's a requirement after kids are born and other things get in the way. I have known couples that don't have sex. More often than not, it's a problem. But there are some couples where it's not a problem. I think, though, I will tell you that the way they got together in the first place was almost always sex. That's what sort of got the pair bond together.
Yeah. So
but let's say you were married and, your husband had a serious accident or, was not deformed, but, quadriplegic. You just divorce them because you can't have sex? I don't think so. I think that you find other ways of meeting those important needs to be connected with each other. Sex is not the only one, but it's the one that I hear a lot about in my practice because I deal primarily with couples between the ages of 25 and 55 who have children. That is primarily my client base. So, and I see a lot of people in that age range who come in with marital problems.
And sex is
sex is almost always an issue. It's not the only issue, but I really work very hard at trying to get people neutral about it. In other words, rather than, all he wants is sex, to kind of back up and sort of talk about the way the brain works. And, it's not that he's just a jerk and all he wants is sex. No, he's really stressed. He feels really excluded. He feels on the outside of a triangle. Again, I don't mean this to be a one-way process. He's playing his part in this too. And
but knowing the facts about how it works in somebody's body
and brain, right,
is useful.
Extremely. I always talk about prairie voles. I always talk about the way this works in the brain. I always talk about the male orgasmic response. That at the moment of orgasm, the brain is flooded with oxytocin, and that is a fact.
Well, we'd like to hear about more facts about sex some other time. Our time has run out, but thank you very much for being here, Peg.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
I'd like to remind you that the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family offers the community affordable psychotherapy in both English and Spanish. If you would like more information about our topic or the services at the Bowen Center, please visit the website at www.thebowencenter.org or send me an email at familymatters@thebowencenter.org. You can find us on Facebook or call 202-965-4400. Thank you for watching. I invite you to join me again for another edition of Family Matters. I'm Dr. Mariana Martinez, and your family does matter.